succeed. But this is effectively how the world is being run today, and not just by the United States of America, but by its allies, both in South America, which have grown. What the Bolivarians did in South America, which annoyed the United States a great deal and angered them, was to create an alternative. Economically, left social democracy; politically, anti-imperialist; global, and the aid given by Chavez when he was alive to the Bolivians, to the Ecuadorians, to others who were in need of it, was quite astonishing. Acts of true internationalism, saying we can work together, we can create something different. Alas, it was not to be. His own tragic death created a crisis, which we see is still going on in many ways. And then the United States were proactive during the Chavez years. We live in a world where history, especially in the media and television networks, is totally ignored. But let's not forget the 3 attempts made to get rid of Hugo Chavez, who was elected with huge majorities. A coup organized by the army, defeated by rank-and-file soldiers, and huge mass mobilizations in Venezuela. The poor came out to defend the government, defeated that coup. Some of you will recall that when they'd set up this joke president, a third-rate businessman who had to be flown to Madrid because they were scared the secret might come out, where he wore a presidential suit and hat, and then was flown back to Caracas and presented to the media in the Miraflores Palace as the new president of Venezuela. Don't forget that. They tried that with the tops of the army at that time, and that failed. And the most symbolic event of that 2 weeks was when the general came out to order the band to play the national anthem. A 16-year-old peasant lad from an ultra-poor family refused to play the trumpet. Some of you will remember that. And the general said, "I'm ordering you to play the trumpet." He said it 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the trumpeter said, "General, you seem very keen that someone should play the trumpet. Here, have a go yourself." That was the spirit of resistance in Venezuela at that time. And it was impossible to carry the coup through. And Chavez came back, again won elections after that, but they didn't try anything too serious on having failed this time and through other means that they used. Maduro came to power at a time when the economic situation was difficult. And look, for those of us in real solidarity, meaningful solidarity with the Venezuelans at this time and their elected government, we have to acknowledge to ourselves, mistakes were made. Mistakes were made on the economy, which are now recognized by most people. But that is not the reason Maduro is being toppled by the United States, because he made mistakes in the economy. That's why we're nervous. Because those mistakes cost some support, even though Maduro's vote is on a par with the votes received by Macron and many other European leaders in Europe today. They are on a par with that. But a lot of Bolivarian supporters stayed at home. And that we shouldn't forget. And that, to be frank, is what makes me slightly nervous. Because the base of support of Bolivarianism in Venezuela has been huge. And will they come out to try and prevent their government from being defeated? That's one thing. The second thing, again we have to be frank, is the Venezuelan army. So far, the military command has rebutted all attempts by the United States to push it in the direction of getting rid of the elected government. Will they carry on pushing them? What are the Chinese and the Russians who vetoed, who made their positions clear at the Security Council do behind the scenes? We simply do not know. There is no information. What we do know is that the economic crisis in Venezuela undoubtedly played its part in destabilizing the regime, and this economic crisis, which possibly the regime, after all, the Bolivians have managed the situation reasonably well, could have been managed had the United States not imposed sanctions. And that is the other mechanism that is used against governments they don't like. Impose sanctions. You don't like Putin, impose sanctions on Russia. You don't like the regime in Iran, impose sanctions. So here you have the global economic order totally under the control of global institutions that themselves are determined, their cadres, their personnel are determined, nominated by the United States of America. So the banks are told you can't have any transactions with Venezuela or Iran. Of course, it's not completely possible these days to do that. I mean, for instance, things change. The Iranians have found ways via Russia and China to trade. The Venezuelans will slowly find them and are finding them. The Mexican government has said it's going to help. So the United States can't have can't have everything its own way, but they try and do it. And we have to understand that our government is complicit in all this. I mean, these jokers on the conservative front bench, whose names it's difficult to remember because they change with such frequency these days. You know, one day X is a minister for this, and then the next day X has resigned and Y has been. So, you know, you can't keep up with all that. But they carry out, they behave as they're instructed to do. And also, in all these Western countries now, the tiny distinction between diplomats and intelligence agents is disappearing. It's very clear. I mean, the woman who has been busy organizing and destabilizing governments, Kelly Kaderling, was stationed at the US Embassy in Caracas for many years, helped carry out the wishes of the National Endowment of Democracy, which is effectively an intelligence-funded organization to back, usually, and in 90% of the cases, right and far-right parties to challenge governments which they don't like. And this is a process, incidentally, which started off a long time ago in parts of Eastern Europe and certainly played a big part in the dismantling of Yugoslavia. Quite a lot of these institutions were involved in that, and they have carried on subsequently. So they try and perfect themselves, but the method they use is the same. And the method is this: back an opposition, have some street mobilizations, carry out acts of violence, provoke the government that needs to be toppled into reacting to the violence, paint that government then in lurid colors in the mass media, make people feel that the situation is totally desperate, and then strike. Remove governments, put governments we want, or they want, in the place of the leaders who've been got rid of, or regimes that have been changed. It hasn't worked that well so far, except in the Balkans. It worked in Yugoslavia, but with dire results economically and socially for the people of that part of the world. But it hasn't worked so well in many, many other parts of the country. In Libya, do you know what they did after organizing the public lynching and killing of Gaddafi and the show trial and lynching of Saddam Hussein? Now, these are people we can have many differences with. But even this wretched Trump, in one of his tweets, fighting internal battles against his own people, said, Trump, this is Trump tweeting, can anyone say that the situation in Iraq and Libya is better because we toppled Saddam and Gaddafi, or was the situation in these countries better before we invaded? Well, the answer is obvious. It was better on every level. But the fact is that he tweeted it because of internal discussions and conflicts taking place on Syria. So far, this rogues gallery is united on what to do in South America. And that is what makes them dangerous. Democrats and Republicans are united. Not a single major figure from the Democrats in the United States has attacked what was done to Chavez, because they had been trying to do it before. And before them, Bush. And before him, God knows who else. It's something that's been going on for years. The only thing that changes is the method. So from here, what we do is what we are doing. We tell the truth. We fight back. We support organizations like Venezuela Solidarity, and increasingly more and more I feel it will also have to be Brazil's solidarity, because what is being planned there by this government in Brazil is truly dire. And we use the social networks as best we can to spread the truth, because that is the one thing we will never get unless there's a change, a meaningful radical change, which we might get with a new Labour government, or one hopes we will get it with a new Labour government. The media now is just an arm of the government. That is how it functions. The British media was always carefully and cleverly managed. It is now managed crudely, and it doesn't resist. And if you look at some of these people writing in The Guardian on Latin America or on Russia, I don't want to particularly mention names, but you can guess. Rory Carroll, why not mention a few names? Luke Harding. I mean, which parts of the deep have they emerged from? I mean, the deep state. Where have they come from? Who is training them? Where do they get their information? Who briefs them? Do they challenge it? And The Guardian boasting that it is an independent publication. But it is technically and financially, on the face of it, but it's become an absolutely despicable rag in the way it functions. So let's hope, friends, because one act of solidarity that we could do concretely in this country is, of course, elect Jeremy Corbyn and send him to Downing Street.